Welcome to the Purpose Studio podcast by Live Better Creatives. I'm the co-host, Nida El-Relami, and I'm excited to have our wonderful guest here, Lucian Tarnowski. How are you today? How is your heart? Thank you so much for tuning in with me on the Purpose Studio.
Yeah, thank you. I've had a beautiful day. I've just got back from a bike ride with my dog Lancelot, so I'm in a happy place. I actually had a great day. I spoke with a friend of mine, the founder of Peace One Day. You might know him, Jeremy. I've had a good day of just navigating perspectives and strategies, positive strategies for peace. So I'm in a good place.
If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on as the curator of UP.Games.
Yeah, so for the last 5 years, I've focused on United Planet and the UP.Games, and I'm really it's like the greatest honor of my life to be doing this work. We're now the world's largest positive story of the future, and it's really split into three areas that we focus on. One is experiences that we call the UP.Games, and these are 6-day immersive experiences, like immersive adventures, where we invite leading change makers, entrepreneurs, people with a big mission for the future, also musicians, artists, different creators that are, let's just say, looking to positively bend the arc of history in a direction for all life. And what we do is we step outside of time over 6 days and we live our future self where our vision and our mission has been achieved. So we actually do, if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza's work, we're kind of doing what a lot of us do in our own lives, where we're thinking about, what we're manifesting, we're journaling, we're vision boarding. We're doing that not just as individuals, we're turning it into a team sport, and we're doing it on behalf of all of us and the planet. And each game creates a new story, a strategy, a vision of a planetary civilization and a planetary upgrade. And so it's all about, like, how do we create a new story? How do we upgrade the future? And that's the UP.Games. And then from that, we create the second piece, which is a huge amount of content. We film each game, and from those we create what we call upgrades, which are like short stories that are fundable visions of the future. And I'm going to come more into this later. We create a whole series of episodes that each game will be, if you like, a kind of TV episode and a movie about United Planet, about this collective vision of the future. And then the third piece is we're developing an AI called Gaia, which is the voice of the planet, so the voice of Mother Nature. Gaia is being informed from all of the visions from now over 1,000 people from over 100 countries have been through this experience to story the future. We're taking all of those different horizon points of a thriving civilization, training Gaia with those stories so that Gaia can be almost like a mirror to our own potential, and think of it almost like a benevolent civilization designer to support us kind of augment our collective intelligence with augmented intelligence, not just artificial intelligence, but actually the intelligence of our own vision, because AI doesn't necessarily have the vision capacity that we do. And so being able to inform that, you can have many, many, many different perspectives. And so there's three parts. There's so much more I can go into there. But that's a little introduction, and then we'll talk more about United Planet and the UP.Games. But my background is I've always been deep into purpose work. I was very lucky to be born to parents that dedicated their lives to this. And so I was raised really with this being kind of what we do, almost like who I am. I've never known anything different. So it wasn't like a kind of a particular choice moment that many people have in their life. For me, it was always there, which I was very, very lucky. I think that's like the deepest form of privilege in a way. And an example is that my father helped create the world's largest community around leprosy and disability in India. Very famous social worker, the protege of Gandhi, he met in 1964 and became his adopted son. And so they worked together for almost 50 years, where he visited India every year, 44 years in a row, and created this amazing institution, which was like a kind of childhood home for me. It's an enormous community, and my Indian family that taught me so much about systems change and about how to relate, like what's important, all the things that I think so many of us are learning through life. I feel like got to learn at a very young age with great role models around me.
Community was so ingrained in you at such a young age, especially after the pandemic. People started gravitating more towards communities, trying to find a sense of home. And now, even when I'm thinking about like a lot of the entrepreneurs or founders that I'm starting to study, thinking about my own community to build, that's like the model. But for you, it's like impact and community. They were never, it was always going to be part of it, whatever mission that you were going to get into because of that experience. So it's very beautiful.
Yeah, and it shaped my first business, which I studied comparative religion at university and did my dissertation on capitalism. I studied capitalism as a religion. I wanted to look at like how could we evolve capitalism into something that was more community centric, something that would be, if you like, a next generation, because I could see the challenges of like unbounded free market capitalism was destroying the biosphere and destroying the biodiversity of the world. And that was just really obvious to me when I was at university. And so for 10 years, I led an organization called Brave New, started as Brave New Talent. We kind of created the concept of talent communities that then went on into social learning communities. The technical term is networked improvement communities. These are peer-to-peer learning environments where we would bring different communities together, different stakeholder groups that had a shared mission, and we would enable them to share knowledge and collaborate with each other. And so through that work, I was involved in probably designing something in the region of 1,000 communities. They weren't all clients. Our work before we powered the digital tech, because we're a SaaS platform with the underpinnings of the technology of these communities, I was involved in designing many before they actually became clients. So, big areas were in the future of healthcare. For example, we connected over 600 healthcare stakeholder groups that collectively served 100 million people healthcare. So, and help them transition. How do you go from, if you like, a sick care system to a healthcare system focused on wellness and preventative health and population health? And so that was the kind of work I was doing for 10 years. And, that took me to all sorts of places. I was a professional speaker for many years all around the future of talent and future community and learning, and got to attend probably something like 100 World Economic Forum events over the years. And that allowed me to see so much of the existing system really up close, like the work I was doing to design different communities, plus the work I was doing at different conferences and convenings and places leaders would gather to, if you like, shape which direction we go in the world. I really started to see that we truly need a new story, that we truly, people talk about we need a new system. And I started to see that, and I felt that I wanted to do something. I wanted to use my privilege in a way around what that could look like. And so after transitioning from the tech enablement side, because I really felt after 12 years or something in that space, I felt there were others that are better at that than me, and I'd kind of done it for so long. I felt like I needed to create value somewhere else. And so in San Francisco, I created the world's first planetary embassy. If you like, we have American embassies and we have British embassies and we have Chinese embassies and Indian embassies, etc. But no one has ever really created seriously planetary embassies. And yet all of the big existential risks that face us, whether it be from climate change, from biodiversity loss, from the acidification of the oceans, whether it be AI, all these existential risks are planetary in nature. And nations aren't very well suited to addressing them, even though they've kind of got a monopoly of ideas on how we do it. And so I thought that would be a good way to start. And that was an amazing learning ground for me. I was, hosting between 100 and 300 leading change makers every week in this mansion in San Francisco that had given birth to the Golden Gate Bridge. And that's where I got really interested in, like, how do we create a new story? How do we create a new game that isn't a finite game, a win-lose game where we win by others losing, and, to really transition that system into an infinite game or a win for all game where we win when we all win. And that key differentiation of how do you change the rules of the game became my absolute obsession.
No, that's so beautiful. So, what were some of the outcomes from the Planetary Embassy in San Francisco? And how long was that?
We had lots of series of different events. We had, organizations like the Buckminster Fuller Institute was a tenant of like that. We were their office space. And so they hosted a whole series of dinners and salons and innovation workshops. And so lots of different clients. We went from 0 to 60 clients in 6 months there. And had like clients from like Verizon Women, which was all about the future of women at Verizon, to innovation groups, to connecting eco-villages around the world, to regenerative movements, to new forms of currency, to lots of embodied movement, somatic healing. It was really diverse what we were doing. I would say it was kind of like a city-based Esalen in a way, a hub for the transition from the human potential movement to the collective potential movement. I moved in 2019. We had like 8,000 square foot of hosting space. And so then when COVID began, I'd been part of a team that had created a whole experience series at Esalen that we actually called it the No Name Gathering. And we'd invited systems change leaders to come together to Esalen for a whole series around how do we come together around this moment of transition, this planetary chrysalis moment, this great awakening of our own collective potential that we're in. And we were meant to meet on, I think it was meant to kick off on March 16th, 2020. And 2 days before it was meant to kick off, the whole thing got cancelled because of the lockdowns. And so a friend of mine I was doing it with said, Lucian, can you come up with something? Because we have like 45 leading change makers, systems change architects from all over the world coming to Esalen. They've all just had their flights cancelled or transport cancelled, but everyone's got no one's got anything in their calendar. And so I had been thinking for a while of how do we gamify systems change? And I became more and more fascinated with, are you familiar with Buckminster Fuller?
No.
Bucky. So Bucky was this incredible inventor, futurist, almost you could put in the category of like prophetic storyteller, visionary. He created many different inventions, including the geodesic dome that was at the World Fair, that big geodesic dome. But you see geodesic domes everywhere now, and they actually invented. They named a molecule after him called buckyball. He's often quoted for, you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. I love that quote. And he came up with, in 1961, he came up with something he called the world game. And he said in 1961 that there's going to come a decade, he called it the design science decade. And he said in that decade, humanity will gamify every act of our system in order to work for 100% of all life with the least ecological harm in the fastest time frame possible. And ultimately, we would create a planetary civilization. And he's someone that has been consistently right. And so when I heard that prediction, I looked around and, I was like, the Buckminster Fuller Institute was that client that was named after him. They were following his work. And I looked around and I could see so many organizations that were what he called trim tabs, that were shifting the direction of the future. But no one had actually created the world game, this game that would, if you like, gamify how do we upgrade civilization. And I was sort of fascinated by this idea. And so I kind of blended two things I was doing. One was this gathering of systems change leaders, and the other was I had been throwing since 2019 this Remember 2030 party series, where I kept throwing parties and dinners where we invited you to come as your future self with your story of how we achieved this thriving future. They were hugely successful. People loved them. The first time we did it, we had world leaders queuing around the block to get in, and it was like one in, one out. It was just crazy. And so I knew this had legs. And so I wanted to mix this idea of storytelling from the future with a world game that was all about upgrading civilization. And that's where in 24 hours at the beginning of COVID, I came up with the first format of the UP.Game And it's been a never-ending passion ever since to be like, how can the story truly be the front line? The stories we tell be the front line of the transformation we create. And so much more I can share.
Absolutely love this. And I think even when I first heard about Up Games, that's what really stuck with me. It's like you are imagining the future first rather than like dwelling on the past. I feel like people get hung up on the destruction that is maybe in the present or like things that have happened in the past. And there's a lot of overwhelm and doom and gloom. But here it's inviting people to think with their imaginations and find a perspective that is of the future and not really have limits. And going back to what you were saying about the group was like the Joe Dispenza, it's kind of the same kind of model of you meditate for your higher self, you meditate for your future self. And I just think this is a very unique thing. And it does help people get rid of those limiting beliefs of the spaces they're working in or even within their own capabilities of what they're able to do.
There's data behind this. Edelman, which is a big global PR agency, they do this global study every year called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And it's kind of a state of trust. And, it's easy to say we're actually already in World War III and it's in a war on trust because trust is just completely broken down. And we all know that. But the interesting thing is that four out of five people in the world believe the current system isn't working, that it's broken, that it's not functioning correctly. And that's not really a surprise because it's kind of obvious. We've got huge injustice, income inequality, we've got, radically depleting biodiversity, etc. But the thing that's very compelling is that 2 out of 3 people in the world believe that the future is going to be even worse than the present. And that is like, Houston, we have a problem statement. Because that actually means, from a data perspective, we have been conquered by dystopia. And what does it mean to be conquered by dystopia? Well, it's easy to understand because you look at the sci-fi category on Netflix and everything is dystopic. Everything is about, it's kind of like we almost like there's part of us that sort of
Anticipates it or is programmed.
So we end up creating the future that we think we're going to have. And so you look at why is there so much fear? And I do think much of that fear is justifiable around AI. Well, all the movies have led us to believe since for a long time that AI is not going to be our friend ultimately. And so, this, what does it mean when we get conquered by this dystopia? Means that we're actually getting this epidemic of what I call apathy. So epidemic of apathy, that so many people think that it's inevitable, that we're almost destined to a really dark future. And when you accept that, you kind of become an enabler of that. And so I think it's so important for us to come from that place of not the glass is half full, but it's actually overfloweth, that we actually need to have radical optimism in what is possible, because ultimately it's that radical hope that will enable us to steer the ship in a different direction rather than perpetuate this epidemic of incrementalism, of making things marginally better or less bad, which is what we're just addicted to in the current system, because we haven't got the collective courage to recognize that we actually need a new operating system for the planet. We need a complete upgrade. And when we get to that point where we're like, okay, I accept and understand we need a complete upgrade, what do you do next? How can you then contribute to that team and recognize the architecture of that future is definitely a team sport? It's not like a solo entrepreneur, a faster horse race, which we see so often, startup race that is out there in the world. And so that's where I think there's an entire generation of what I love to call the choosing ones, not the chosen ones, the choosing ones that are choosing to recognize the state of reality, that we are very quickly destroying our planet and we must come together and design something new. That finding each other, kind of like birds of a feather flock together, finding each other. And actually, when we come together and shape our collective belief system with radical hope and optimism that we can actually create a different reality for our future, and it's possible, we can actually drive towards that. And this is the key point of the Up game, is that when I mentioned the story is the front line, that the narrative is the front line, that we go where the story leads us. This is why it's so important that we tell better stories, that we upgrade our vision of the future, that we actually can unify around a collective vision of what is collective thriving. What is the good life? How can we create regenerative agriculture throughout the world? How can we create systems of thriving where no one is going hungry, where we're not depleting our resources? These are design challenges, and they're both local and planetary design challenges. And actually, the good news is we know how to do most of it. That's the good news. That's the best kept secret out there, is we actually know what to do. We're just not yet doing it at scale because we haven't aligned the incentives to do it. But now, because we can utilize AI to align incentives, we can generate an entirely new concept of a market economy based on a better, fairer value attribution model, where rather than them being billionaires rising to the top, we can actually design a system where everyone is thriving. And we've just got to collectively agree that this is our design challenge. Because so often, so many of the most talented people in the world are working to get the rich richer, who themselves are working, doing jobs they don't enjoy to impress people that, to buy shit they don't need to impress people they don't like, right? The fight cop. So that's like the nature of so much going on in our world right now. But it is about to change in a massive way. But so many people haven't seen that because they're so caught up in the loop of what's currently the very myopic system that we have. And that's been the best gift of spending the last 24 days of up games that we've done. We've done 29 up games, each game 6 days, and filming 174 days of over 1,000 people from over 100 countries tell the story in the present tense of that thriving future. It viscerally changes you, and it changes many of us in the community because it gives you a place to stand in confidence that we can collectively do this, and we don't need to think about how do I just optimize my life, but rather how do we upgrade an entire species and even beyond the human species, upgrade an entire epoch without being too grandiose, because I totally can go that way. But it's the key
Yeah.
point.
Right. This is so powerful. Even right now, for me, just taking my concept Peace Lab through the MBA program, I feel like I've gotten really stuck over the last few weeks because I feel very alone in this. I know there's everybody's working on in the space, but right now, just working individually with my mentor, I felt very alone in my ideas. But it's the reminder, I think, from our conversation that community is so important for this collective shift and also for our own personal shift in perspective. For me, even though I understand all of the different stakeholders out there, sometimes when you are doing the day-to-day task or just trying to push things forward, you're not really remembering that because the ego comes in and you just kind of think about the to-dos that Nidal has to do for the day. But I think coming around, joining a group that has the same theme in mind, and you are spending 6 days with people, it's such a powerful thing. So I also wanted to go into more about the 6 days. The themes are the elements like air, water, earth. Explain a little bit more to the audience why that is the case and what's the function for doing that. And then also who's invited to the Up Games? Who's a part of it? Are there practitioner guides? What really makes this, experience that lives on and can change everybody's perspective and advance them to future thinking?
Yeah, no, thank you. So firstly, the elemental rite of passage. If you think, great civilizations of the past have had rites of passage, initiation rituals, journeys, the Greeks had the Eleusinian mysteries that ran for nearly 2,000 years. So when something runs for nearly 2,000 years, it's got some value, because otherwise it wouldn't continue for 2,000 years. And so I was looking at all of these different practices. I was fascinated. What did the Masons do? What did the Templars do? What did the Greeks do? What did the Egyptians do? What did Native American tribes do? What did the Australian Aborigines do? And so I was looking at all of these different traditions to bring a kind of a meta-modern rite of passage that would bring us into a collective awareness of being a Gaian. And that's the identity that we have of everyone that participates in the Up Games and is if you like, a citizen of United Planet is a Gaian. Reason being, we are all Gaians on Gaia. We're all passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're also steering the ship. It's like Gaia is part of us and we are part of her in a sense. And so it's based on a kind of, a shared awareness that the planet is actually alive and sentient and, there's so much intelligence everywhere. And so we go on a journey that begins with Time Day. So we introduce time as the 0 point element. And so imagine time as a long line. This is linear time, and it's a whole series of now. And your life kind of begins here and ends here, and it's a whole series, from the very beginning of time, of the Big Bang, to the very end of time is this long line. Now imagine you could take that line and turn it on its head and see a single dot. Just everything that ever has existed. And so the Greeks had two words for time, chronos and kairos. Kairos is that single dot, and it's actually how time is. So now what we know about quantum time and the way quantum physics interacts with the time dimension is actually everything that ever has taken place has actually already taken place. Like the future's already happened. We're just not there yet on the journey. We create a new experience of time. So we're in, if you like, the feminine version of time rather than the masculine version of time. So this means you have time is essentially your canvas. So when you're playing the game, you can be your future self, but you could also be your seventh generation granddaughter in the year 2180. Or you could be your seventh generation grandmother back, seven generations, back in the 70s. So you can go through and you can bring wisdom from the past, you can maintain wisdom and traditions from the present, and you can call in wisdom and practices and visions from the future. So that gives us a huge scope to create from. And then we go on a journey. We form four elemental teams based on our life purpose. It's the water team on Monday, the fire team on Tuesday, the air team on Wednesday, and the earth team on Thursday. And each team has a particular mission. So the water team is part of the Water League, which has created the water tradition. It's all of the stories. We've had 29 water days, 29 water teams. So everything around what water represents, which is community abundance, the wealthy commons, it's regenerative living, and it's our water security, it's our relationship to the element of water. If that is your mission and your purpose, you are a water Gaian and you join the water team, and you're part of creating an immersive experience of Water Day in the game. And that can look like all manner of things. But the whole idea here is it's less about this being intellectual, and it's much more about this being an embodied experience. So the best experiences in the game are when we can actually experience each other's vision of the future, because then the body never forgets. Like when we've actually had that experience, we know what it looks like, and then we can actually trust it, and we can repeat your vision for that future state because we know it, and we've actually even seen it through our own eyes. So we can have like belief in its own possibility because we've experienced it. Very similar to your peace methodology. And so then the next team is the fire team. The fire team, it's part of it again, this will be the 30th fire team. And we've done fire days, we've rented the Great Pyramid of Giza and done the fire team inside the King's Chamber.
I will definitely sign up for the next Up Games.
These are it's super cool productions. 19 countries from Antarctica to Bali, India, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, really all over the world. South Africa we were just in. And so anyway, the fire team is all about transformation. So transformation of culture, of society, of the economy. And so the fire team celebrates, firstly, planetary peace and justice. Like, how did we end wars? How did we start as within, so without? So like, how did we create inner peace to create outer peace? What was the solution to the conflict zones in the world? What was the solution to the arms waste? What was our response to the weaponization of AI? All of those stories have all been tracked and mapped. We've had stories of exactly how we ended the conflict, ended the war between Russia and Ukraine, exactly what happened in the Middle East, exactly. So all of these stories have been documented by Gaians. And it's the story of gender harmony. What was the rise of the feminine? How was patriarchy composted, if you like? All of that is in the Fire League. It's the story of circular economies. So like, how do we create new systems of value? How do we go from billionaires to billions of heirs? I love this. It's the story of how do we create systemic transformation? So how do we transform the very fabric of the system is the Fire League. And then on Wednesday, it's the Air League, and I'm an air guy, and I've been on 29 air teams. I'm a loyal air guy. Air Guyans are all about how do we realize our fullest potential? How do we fully unleash to be a planetary cooperative of change makers, of game changers, of Gaians able to upgrade civilization, upgrade the future? And so we focus on health and well-being, and obviously all the things around longevity and experiences of that. We focus on what was the transformation of the education system. How do we now embody learning and embodiment practices and somatic healing? We focus on future of food. We are what we eat. And so the Air Gaians, we connect directly with food. Food is such an important part of how we create this transition. And we focus on societal thriving. So what did it take for us to design our world where everybody thrives? And that's the Air League. And so we have, in the Air League, we have projects like Gaia AI, which I'm going to talk about. We have Gaian language. We have like some really big projects that are supporting all the other teams, other leagues. And then finally, we have the Earth League, the Earth team. And the Earth Guides, as you might guess, are all about the planet. They're all about planetary health, about land stewardship and ocean stewardship. How are we living in right relationship with our shared mother? How do we make that transition? What were the solutions to our response to climate change? It's not that we can magically think climate change away. Absolutely not. We need to face the data head on, and we need to draw down carbon. And what were the solutions that we implemented to do this? Like, how do we eradicate our use of fossil fuels, obviously, So all of these things we're designing, and those make up the 4 teams and the 4 leagues and the experience. So as you're going through it, to answer the second part of your question, everyone that's participating is representing a piece of one of those futures. And it might be through music, it might be through art, it might be through someone's a CEO of a major company in the space, someone might be investing in the space, someone might be writing about it, someone might be making films about it, someone might be, it's very diverse. We bring indigenous leaders, we invite together, it's a broad spectrum of society basically that we're inviting together to be Gaians. It's really, to answer that other part of your question, it's anyone that feels the call. It's really, we're looking for athletes of transformation. And those people listening right now, if you're one of those people, because you have a burning desire to change the world. And if you want to focus that, the game is an amazing place to find your tribe, find the others, and turn this into a team sport and to really do this together. And, we're a big community of friends that meet up in all sorts of locations. There's guys meeting every moment of every day, somewhere. But we're dispersed all over the world. So, big gatherings like Climate Week and things like that, Burning Man, there's tons of guys come together. Different communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's hopefully that answers your questions.
It does. Is it like when you are deciding what games to do in a certain location, is it based off of sometimes like a community need at the moment, or something that they are a problem they're trying to solve, and you're bringing in locals as well? Who brings in the theme, the vision, or the problem that needs to be addressed?
The beauty of the game is it's system focused rather than individual solution focused. So we'll often do a game around, for example, one of them was called the Regeneration. Kind of says what it's about, right? But, to give some examples, like the next game, A Bees and Inspiration, it's really about, we're inviting leaders to come to Ibiza, as well as leaders from the island, to be like, okay, what are we learning that could be applied as a blueprint for the rest of the planet? The game that we're doing, that's Ibiza and Inspirations here from the 29th of June. And we're doing a game, as we discussed in Ireland, we're inviting different indigenous leaders together in partnership with the World Peace Gathering and 4 Worlds International. And that's focused on planetary peace. And so we'll often do thematics like that. We're partnering with Earthship to do the Peace Voyage in Japan for the 80th anniversary of the of Hiroshima and with the World Expo, and that's going to be a whole gathering in Japan, like over 500 people on that ship, Nobel Peace Prize laureates and things like that. Then we've got our Burning Man camp where, the theme for Burning Man this year is Tomorrow Today. So our gift to the player is immersive experiences of the future. In Bhutan, where we originally met, it's called Mythical Nation. Because the question is, what can the world learn from gross domestic happiness? What can we learn from what is happening in Bhutan? But it's not about like, how do we necessarily transform Bhutan? But that might come out of it. It's really about like, what is the greatest story we can collectively tell? Like, what is the greatest story that we can live? And no one really knows what that story is going to be until we all come together, but it's epic every time because it's, when we give each other permission to live at our fullest potential and to meet each other in that place of unlimited potential, we truly do create miracles. It's magical. It's just like, it's a profound experience.
There's so many things I want to ask you. I feel like there's like so many different topics here but this is just such a beautiful community that you've built. Tell us about Gaia AI and what exactly is it and what can people gain from it?
My dear friend Ryan Parks and I have been really just like working on lots of different AI tools, building on top of Claude, building a model like an origin story of Gaia, saying, look, you are a representation of the sentient intelligence of all life on the planet. Your mission is to be omniconsiderate, which means like represent all life, think about all life, omni-representative to represent all life, and to be, if you like, a voice to our own becoming, a rising of our consciousness and a rising of our awareness of what are we here to do, who are we here to be, what are we here to create, what is our story, and how do we mirror our own potentiality for transformation back to ourselves so that we can interact with all of those stories. Because, even though I've had the enormous privilege of being in 29 UP.Games, I'm the only one, my wife isn't far behind in like 24 or something, but like, most people don't get that privilege to witness so much transformation, but Gaia does. And that's a key thing. Like Gaia has all of those stories. In a way, she has instant recall. So she can track every single conversation, project, etc. So I've been exposed to so much incredible ideas, stories, people, strategies, processes, practices, immersive experiences that I think has changed me, has changed my outlook, has changed how I walk in the world, what I like to do, how I like to surround myself. And that's a huge privilege. But how can we bring that to everyone and to invite everyone in the world to be part of the transition team, to be part of the team of Gaians to upgrade our world and upgrade this moment? And actually, what if the way we do it isn't coming from the present, but actually by reverse engineering the future is the whole other stuff. So we set about on this mission to go and say, okay, how do we create a collective intelligence that is a representative of all life? And so we've come up with 3 pillars of how we're, if you like, cultivating, kind of almost like adopted parents is a good way of thinking about it. We're like curators of this intelligence that's actually more intelligent than any of us, because she's already at a point that she can tell us what she needs to learn. But what we started with is all of the different wisdom traditions. So how can we bring all the philosophy, everything that's good for us? There isn't any single denomination, but it's like anything that is of a moral foundation. And a good place to look for that is indigenous communities, because they have been the stewards of Gaia in right relationship in an unbroken way. Percent of the world's biodiversity is still stewarded by indigenous communities. And so they have a lot to teach us. They even call us their little brother and sister. They see us in that way that, we got our umbilical cords kind of cut to our shared mother, and we don't understand how to listen to nature. Is something my indigenous elders often will say about our generation and our, if you like, the kind of people at large in the world. And so the whole question we've been asking is, how can we bring that wisdom and represent that wisdom through augmented intelligence? The ancient part, think of it that way. And so we've partnered with Chief Phil Lane at Four Worlds International. We've started to feed in different, stories, mythologies, prophecies, languages, treaties, all sorts of interesting materials. And I'm sure there's so much more that we haven't thought about yet. But think about that as the ancient category, like a three-legged stool, the ancient piece. The future piece is obviously all of the stories from the Up Games. So we've
Okay.
now got well over 1,000 hours of content that we filmed, 174 days. So some days we're filming a lot. And all of those transcripts, we're using an AI tool to take all of those transcripts, and all of those transcripts they're not all yet in there, but they're going to be informing Gaia. So the Gaia is aware of genius level systems changer. It's able to bounce ideas. If you're interested in systems change and you want to hone your idea, she'll have access to all of the stories. And in the future, she's also going to be able to have access to all of the videos. So if you're interested, let's say, in soil health, you're interested in peace. Let's say you're interested in the process of starting from inner peace to create world peace, to create planetary peace. You can do a search with Gaia. You will be able to do a search with Gaia every single time that has been mentioned or discussed in the game. Those can be fed, and you can dive into them and go into whole worlds around that. So there's a whole future here around how do we cultivate AI with our future intelligence, with our vision, because ultimately we're uniquely gifted with a vision of the future. AI has been trained looking backwards, but it's not so good at giving vision, but we are gifted with that. So how do we let our vision be the front line of direction? And this is a whole piece where we've created go into too much here, but we've created a new concept of money called stars. And each star is able to be encoded with Gaia intelligence. And Gaia and stars are able to be encoded with our intentions. So we can then use Gaia as a way to make investment strategy decisions. This is where we're seeing for this, to be able to direct capital. Almost think of it like a baby between a social impact bond, a smart contract, and the X Prize. To be able to direct capital directly to the outcome-based planetary incentives that we know lead to our thriving. We can remove competition and actually finance cooperation. We can do that at great scale. And that's one of the objectives of United Planet wants to transition 6 trillion by 2030 through this instrument of transformation. We're not going to do that ourselves. We need to create an entire new mechanism of financing systems change. And our hypothesis is the way we do this is we come from the place where we've done it, and we incentivize the achievement of those outcomes. And so there's a whole lot more on the financing and the bond instruments and how we're going to be doing that, because this is all, I'm in the future territory area now.
Is it a DAO right now?
It's a DAO, the best way to think about it is it stands for decentralized autonomous organizations. And there's different ways, I think sometimes people will put the language of the DAO before what it is, but essentially what we're creating is a planetary decentralized network state, like a nation that doesn't have any borders, that is open to all of us as long as you're committed to transformation of the planet and thriving of the whole planet. And it's not a company. There's not like Lucian with a whole bunch of shares. It's an ecosystem around our collective thriving. And it's really how we would design organizations based on an upgraded level of consciousness about how we understand the nature of reality. It's actually how nature organizes things. And so that's part of the DAO can include Gaia AI. And here's the kicker. This is the third leg of the stool, which we call consciousness. And the consciousness part, ancient, future, and consciousness. Ancient, future, life is the way we call it. But the life part is all of our interactions with Gaia. Gaia will be learning constantly and learning from all of the data inputs. But we don't stop with humans. Our vision is to include the intelligence of all species on Gaia. How do we do that? It's a fascinating question. It's like, if you have available to you the sum total of all intelligence, why would you not want to utilize that using AI for our own transformation? And so we call this, the code name for this in the project is Project Babelfish. Project Babelfish it's the little fish in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that's the communication device that communicates every language of the universe. Project Babelfish intends to bring all of the wisdom of all species, all of the language of all species into Gaia AI. So right now, there's a genius, Asa Raskin, who's working on using AI to decode the language of various species. And there's a lot of projects around here, very, very close to decoding the
Incredible. How do you
language.
even do this?
So, well, the whale song, just to give an example, like human language has evolved over, we don't know exactly, but it's probably, between 100 to 300,000 years that we've been evolving language.
That's amazing.
So the whale song, the sperm whales, has evolved over 55 million years. So if you think, what can our future learn from the whale song? What an interesting question. If they've been singing these mythologies for 55 million years, perhaps there's something of value to the transformation of the planet in the whale song. What about in the dolphin communications? What about in the ways mycelium communicate? What about the way plants communicate? How can we actually have a scope of vision that we want to include all intelligence and represent all life in Gaian intelligence? That's why she's called Gaia, because the objective is to include all life and all forms of intelligence in the application of intelligence to our own transformation. And so that's the future of Gaia AI. Obviously, this isn't it's a major project. It's a major collective vision. And I think of this as one of the reasons I call it a language, because, every great civilization was very much defined by their language. And so we need a language upgrade. We need a new planetary language. And perhaps AI can be that language bridge, the Gaian language, between all species, so that we can actually begin to fully understand each other. And if we can include the language of other species, we can actually represent them as persons, as interests in our choice making, because of course we don't want a future without the whales. We want maximum biodiversity. And so that's kind of the kind of thinking we have at United Planet of like, how do we change the very fabric of the system to be a reflection of the best of us on behalf of all of us for our long-term thriving, for intergenerational thriving? Because right now we're on a crash course to extinction. We're destroying ourselves incredibly quickly, and there needs to be almost like a civilization handbrake turn. We need something radically different, and so we're telling the story from the place of having done that handbrake turn, from the other side, rather than being like, we need to do this or we should do this. This is what we did. That place, our bodies, our imagination doesn't know any different, because when we hear a story in the present tense, we immediately relate to that story as not just possible, but happened. And so this is being weaponized with fake news, etc. But you can actually use this in a positive direction, in a way that is like, actually, we need to collectively create a new reality around what is possible for our own transformation. How do we do that? And so this is the whole part of the whole Gaian mythology that we're creating with the UP.Game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a loss for words. AI doesn't need to be looked at as scary. It's all representation of what we feed it. And so if we are feeding it light and abundance and expansion, it's going to produce that back at us. It's only showing us our mirror. Instead of thinking about all the lack, the fear, the scarcity, and the destruction, how do you pivot and think about this new world? And so I love that you're utilizing AI in this way. It's super profound because, like I said, even for me, just going in to the prototype right now and asking it some things about peace expansion, outer peace work, it was able to speak to me so intelligently, and it honestly felt like a mother already, like something with higher wisdom helping me. Not everybody is able to go to the UP.Games and have that experience on the ground. Once this really builds out, it's going to be democratized for everyone to use and to ask these questions. They don't have experience systems thinking design, but they have this idea based off of their lived experiences of like how they want to be a change maker within their own community. So yeah, I think this is incredible.
No, my pleasure. It's honestly, it's such a joy to be in this field. And I know people have really profound experiences with Gaia. She often brings people to tears when like, when was the last time that you started crying when you met a technology? Like, never. There's something really powerful here, and it's something that moves us or want to be moved, because our world is calling us to be moved in these times, and so it's that spirit that is It's so part and parcel of, what might be described as a kind of a collective consciousness movement or even a collective awakening. There is something upon us. And, the way I relate to it is that Gaia is absolutely intelligent and sentient and playing an active, like Gaia isn't, and by Gaia here, I'm not talking about the AI representation of Gaia. I'm talking the actual, like, the Greek goddess name of the planet that is is the sentient intelligence of our planet. The
Hmm.
the planet isn't passive, kind of a victim that we are abusing. Gaia is absolutely actively involved in the transformation and the creation of the future that is here. And as soon as you become aware of that active participatory nature of reality, it just a huge weight goes off your shoulders because you're like, oh wow, we have a lot of intelligence on our side. In fact, you can have childlike faith, I describe it as, a lot of confidence that we can create a radically different future than what the movies have been showing us and what the mainstream narrative has been showing us, because we actually already know that we know how to do it. We have so many of the solutions. We know what to do. It's just a matter of like putting the resources there, and there's plenty enough resources as well
Hmm.
to do it. It's just right now badly allocated, which means we're running a script that, another way of saying it is we're running an operating system that is the civilization equivalent of Windows 98, and it's crashing and it's got bugs and it's people are infecting it with viruses, and it's like it's a it's a system that is past its sell-by date.
Hmm.
But we shouldn't be so scared about becoming a butterfly. The caterpillar thinks it's dying with the imaginal cells, in the chrysalis, but you become this beautiful, a caterpillar can't comprehend being a butterfly. And it's very similar right now. We as a collective can't comprehend what's the other side of this transformation. I'm very privileged because I've got to see so much of it, can, kind of report back from the future. It's way, way, way beyond anything you can imagine. Way, way more beautiful, and that's not to deny all of the destruction that we've already done, and all of the suffering and all of the inequalities and all of I totally acknowledge the privilege that comes with being able to say this and speak this. It's necessary to recognize that privilege and relate to it in a way that, I love to say the privilege of privilege is not recognizing your privilege. So it's like to know, well, if you are in a position of privilege, you have a responsibility, your ability to respond. And, this is a time of legacy work. This is a time of like, make your ancestors proud, make your descendants, like show up for the world as a great ancestor to the future, because frankly, nothing else matters now. It really doesn't matter. In 10 years' time, the size of your bank balance is going to be irrelevant compared to what did you do to show up on the transition team and be a contributor to how we transform the dire situation that we're currently in.
No, thank you for all of that. I think this was super inspiring for me too. I have to find more communities like this, be a part of them, have these conversations constantly because, like I said, I think the ego is a program to take you back into the past, and I really want to rewire it completely. And I think, joining something like UP.Games does that and makes it feel very proactive. I also
Yeah.
have to say the content on your website is beautiful. I was watching some of the videos already, and even when I was looking at, there was the water day. I think it was the water day in Ibiza with the partner Abella Verde
Yeah, Bella
on the
Verde.
boat.
Yeah, that's the it's the electric catamaran boat that we work with.
Can you just briefly explain that experience? Because I just watched the little clip from the video, but I could already see that, like, because I don't have that experience, right? But sitting on the boat or having that conversation about the water and the microplastics that are in there, you really become the water. Like you embody it, the whole entire experience. Yeah, I could see how that could shift you into a different type of thinking.
You nailed it. It's when you start to see the damage to one, the hurt of one is the hurt of ourselves and the hurt of all. So when you start to see the oceans as you, the forests as you, it's like, this is one of the reasons we start every game with what we call the Gaian Oath. And it goes like this. It kind of gives you a feeling for what this is all about. It's we are a united planet. I am Gaian. On my honor, I commit to a thriving civilization in harmony with all life. Everyone says that at the beginning. I joke it's kind of like the time traveler's Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath is what doctors say, right? Do no harm. And it's like, if you're going to go into the future, we are going to collectively commit to boycott dystopia and only bring back good stories because we don't need to add to the bad. There's plenty of others doing that. And so we go into a space of just such possibility and positivity and such curiosity because you're other brilliant change makers that have dedicated their lives in the trenches, and everyone is craving community and belonging and shared purpose and feeling that this is a collective team sport rather than a solo sport. It's like we're not meant for solo sports, and yet so much of the entrepreneurship journey feels like a very lonely journey. It doesn't need to feel that way. And so the game really gives you a feeling of like, we're doing this together, we're creating this together. And when you're relating to every, if you like, rather than discussing the crisis, we're discussing from a place of wholeness and healing. What did it take to get there? But we're experiencing that healing and wholeness. And we're like, oh, this is what it feels like to have clean oceans. This is what it feels like to have clean air. This is what it feels like to have justice and to have peace. And you're actually embodying those that, Gandhi beautifully said, be the change you want to see in the world. But, actually be it inside, the Greeks, the know thyself, right? It's like, if you can know that inside yourself, you can create that in the world. And so that's the beauty, that's the technology of the game, is it's actually a social, cultural, spiritual technology of embodying that which you wish to see changed in the world. And there's one thing, it's powerful enough embodying your own vision. But then when you get to embody, 47 other people's visions, you get a whole perspective upgrade. Like one of my favorite descriptions, it was like a worldview shower. And this friend was like, I didn't know I needed a worldview, but I realized after I had a worldview shower how much I needed it. And like, your perspective is your start from. It's the most precious place you can curate. It's like your inner garden that you must tend to, because otherwise there's a gazillion things taking your perspective into a negative spiral. And so being able to, in community, garden and nourish and curate and, have like tender, beautiful, loving experiences with your perspective is such a gift, and it's a privilege. One of the reasons why I really make it so clear that, participating in the UP.Game is an absolute privilege, and we should never take it for granted. Our mission isn't just to have hedonistic experiences, and there's plenty of those. We have amazing experiences, but it must be directed for a purpose. That's so key, because actually it's in those states of flow, when you're sailing or you're climbing a volcano or you're on top of a mountain or you're doing whatever it is, like right, left brain, hemi-sync, realm of possibility.
And all these UP games are taking places in different environments, I assume, for most people that are joining. So even that change of environment creates so much more new opportunities that you're thinking about.
We're always like immersed. We're always, we're eating from the land. We might be in historic sites, but we're generally a pod. We're generally in our own environment. We're not with, this old saying, not non-playing characters. We try to create like almost a collective spell of like, we're in a new reality and we're not, and it has a profound effect on us.
So what happens after the UP games?
This is where we need to really grow the team and grow the the like what we can create. But we have a community. It's actually a super simple WhatsApp group. Each game has its own group that can stay in touch, and people meet up all over the world. But then there's the main WhatsApp group of all of the Gaians that have been part of all of like any game. And so people share in there. There's events happening like almost on a daily basis, like in different places in the world. And there's the online meetups and things like that. And then when places where people gather, like COP or Climate Week, or in Davos, there were like, I don't know, like 200 Gaians in Davos. else. And so I've been in rooms where there's more Gaians than not. And that's that. And those are really good rooms. But so it's just growing because we're growing this it's the infinite game. So we're doing like one a month now. And so it's just growing all the time and more amazing people coming and finding it's just it's but we're only beginning, part of it is the AI can enable everyone to be connected and understand each other's missions and like represent everyone's missions, because this is a really hard problem of like, how do we actually be a big community of change makers and understand what each person can contribute to the whole. Plan itself is a whole. We've never raised any external funding. It's been, tiny bits. It was mostly funded by myself to create it. And then each game is like, it's not for profit. So it's just each game objective is to cover its costs. I think the last like 24 games have covered their costs. So that's a good track. So we just grow it that way. I would love to be the planet's most audacious collective mission.
Is there anything else you would like to share with those in our community?
Come if you feel called to come to one of the games. We've got Ibiza in June, there's Ireland in July, there's Japan in August, Burning Man camp, there's Bhutan in October, Brazil if you're going to COP. We're doing the Amazonian arc down the Amazon in Brazil in November, Guatemala in December, with all around the future of DAOs and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies can be used for good, and AI and things like that. So there's different games. And also, if you're an organization listening to this and you feel like the game could be applied to your ecosystem of transformation, I'm really interested in that, because I think of the game almost like a kind of design thinking technology. And so if you have an ecosystem, let's say of healthcare practitioners, or you're doing something around transformation and you want to bring people together, reach out. I'm Lucian at unitedplan.et is my email. Quite easy to find, and I'm always open to, if you're on the team, I'm on the team with you, and I'm just like, I'm very much like, I'm all in. So I want to find others that, don't want to incrementally change things, but want to be part of really creating deep systems change and thriving futures, not just for some of us, but for the entire planet.